It was a perfect Halloween night, crisp air, the moon hanging high, casting an eerie glow over the countryside. I'd convinced my girlfriend, Sarah, to come with me to a corn maze just outside of town. She was always the skeptical one, laughing off any mention of the supernatural, while I liked the thrill of a good scare. Tonight, I wanted to push the limits a little. We pulled up to the maze around 8 p.m., just as darkness fully set in. The place was packed with people in costumes, laughing and stumbling through the tall corn stalks. The maze stretched out before us like a labyrinth, the entrance marked by a crooked wooden sign with the words, "Haunted Hollow," scrawled in faded red paint. Sarah squeezed my hand, but not out of fear. "I hope this is scarier than the last one." "That was so lame," she said with a smirk. I smiled back, determined to prove her wrong. We entered the maze, the towering corn on either side of us swaying slightly in the breeze. The sound of distant laughter and screams faded as we moved deeper inside. The moonlight barely penetrated through the dense stalks, and the path twisted and turned, making it easy to get disoriented. "Let's take a left," I suggested, pulling Sarah along. We hadn't seen anyone for a while, and the excitement of the night was starting to turn into something else, something more unsettling. The further we walked, the quieter it became. There were no more sounds of people or distant screams. The only thing we could hear was the dry rustle of corn stalks brushing against each other. It was as if we had crossed some invisible boundary where the fun of Halloween gave way to something darker. "I don't like this," Sarah muttered, glancing around. Her earlier confidence was starting to crack, and I could feel her tension growing. "Are we lost?" I was about to answer when a cold breeze swept through the maze, much colder than it had been all night. My skin prickled, and I noticed that the rustling of the corn had stopped. Everything around us was dead silent. I stopped walking and looked over at Sarah. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with unease. "Did you feel that?" I asked, trying to mask my own nervousness. Before she could answer, we both heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from somewhere deeper in the maze. It wasn't a playful shout or laugh, but a soft, slow murmur, like someone was standing just behind us, speaking directly into our ears. Sarah gripped my arm tightly. "What the hell was that?" I turned around, scanning the maze for any sign of someone playing a prank on us. There was nothing, just the endless rows of corn stretching into the darkness. "Maybe it's part of the maze, like some hidden speakers or something," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. The whisper came again, this time louder, clearer. "Help me." It sounded like it was coming from right in front of us, just around the next corner. I felt a chill run down my spine. This didn't feel like a normal Halloween scare anymore. "We should leave," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't like this." But something compelled me to move forward. I had to know what, or who, was making that sound. Against Sarah's protests, I led us down the path, turning the corner where the voice had come from. There, standing in the middle of the path, was a figure. A woman. She was wearing an old-fashioned white dress, the kind you'd see in a horror movie. Her head was tilted down, long dark hair covering her face. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. "Is that someone from the maze?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head slowly, my throat dry. Something was wrong. The way she stood there, completely still, made every instinct in me scream to run. Then she moved. Her head snapped up, revealing hollow, sunken eyes and a mouth twisted in a grotesque smile. She took a step toward us, her body jerking unnaturally, like a puppet on strings. Sarah screamed and bolted, yanking me with her as we ran back the way we came. But no matter how fast we ran, the maze seemed endless. Every turn led us deeper, every path felt like it was closing in on us. Behind us, I could hear the woman's footsteps, slow, deliberate, following us through the maze. I dared to look back once and saw her gliding between the rows of corn, her face still locked in that horrible grin, her hollow eyes fixed on us. We rounded another corner and came face to face with another figure, a man this time, his eyes wide with terror, blood dripping from a gash on his neck. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there blocking our path. "Go around," I yelled, pulling Sarah to the side, back into the corn itself. We tore through the stalks, ignoring the cuts on our arms and faces as we tried to escape. The whispers were everywhere now, voices calling out from all around us, pleading, crying, some even laughing. It felt like the maze was alive, like it was trapping us inside. Then, suddenly, the corn cleared, and we stumbled out into the parking lot. Gasping for breath, I turned back to the entrance of the maze. There was nothing there, no figures, no whispers. Just the dark, swaying cornfields under the moonlight. Sarah and I didn't speak on the ride home. We both knew what we had seen wasn't part of any Halloween attraction. Something had followed us. Something from that maze wasn't letting us go. And deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The ride home was suffocating in its silence. Sarah stared out the window, her face ghostly in the dim glow of passing streetlights. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road but unable to shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching us. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see her, the woman in white, sitting in the back seat, her twisted grin waiting for me. But the car remained empty. Yet the sensation of her presence lingered, like a shadow clinging to the edge of my consciousness. When we finally pulled up to Sarah's apartment, I parked the car, neither of us making any move to get out. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:45 p.m. It had only been a few hours since we'd entered the maze, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Sarah's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "I can't go back in there." "Not yet." I nodded. The idea of her being alone right now, after what we had just experienced, seemed wrong. "Come back to my place. You'll feel safer there." Without another word, she agreed, and I turned the car around, driving us back to my apartment on the other side of town. The whole time, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that we hadn't really escaped. That the maze, or whatever was in it, had followed us out. When we got to my place, I made sure the door was locked, even double-checking the windows. Sarah sat on the couch, hugging a blanket to her chest, her eyes wide and distant, like she was replaying the entire night in her head. "Do you think we really saw her?" she whispered, finally breaking the silence. I sat down next to her, trying to offer some comfort, but I had no answers. "I don't know what we saw. But I know it wasn't normal." I paused, thinking back to the way that woman had moved, how her body jerked in those unnatural ways. It felt real. We sat there for a while, not knowing what to say. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the stillness, and I could feel the weight of exhaustion creeping in. It was almost midnight now, and part of me just wanted to sleep, to believe this was all just a nightmare we could shake off by morning. But then Sarah stiffened beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I froze, listening. At first, there was nothing but the ticking of the clock. Then, faintly, I heard it, a rustling sound. Like leaves brushing against each other. It was coming from the hallway outside the apartment. The same sound we had heard in the maze. Sarah's grip tightened on my arm. No, this can't be happening. I got up slowly, motioning for Sarah to stay put. My heart was pounding as I approached the door. The sound was louder now, unmistakable. Something was outside. My hand hovered over the doorknob, fear rising in my throat. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed to leave it closed, to not invite whatever was out there inside. But I couldn't just sit here, paralyzed by fear. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. But as I stepped outside, I saw it, the unmistakable impression of corn stalks. They were scattered along the hallway floor in a broken trail, as if someone had brought them inside, leaving a twisted path of dried leaves and stems behind. At the end of the hallway, the air shimmered, distorting the light from the overhead lamps. And in the middle of that shimmering air, she stood. The woman from the maze. Her face contorted in that same hideous grin, her empty eyes fixed on me. I slammed the door shut, backing away, my chest heaving in terror. What? What is it? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. She's here. Outside. I don't know how, but she's here. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. The maze, it followed us. Sarah stood, her face pale. This isn't possible. But it was happening, and deep down, we both knew it. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The temperature in the apartment dropped, and the sound of rustling corn filled the room. It wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was inside. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I groped for Sarah's hand, gripping it tightly. Stay close to me, I whispered, though I had no idea what to do. In the blackness, the rustling grew louder, closer, until it was all around us. And then, there was a voice. A whisper, faint and chilling, just like in the maze. Help me. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to echo from every corner of the room, surrounding us. The darkness felt alive, like it was crawling toward us. Then, from the shadows, a figure appeared. The same woman. Her white dress stained now, her face no longer smiling but twisted in pain. Her hand reached out toward us. Sarah screamed, and I pulled her toward the front door, desperate to get out. But the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it closed from the outside. The woman stepped closer, her hollow eyes fixed on me. Help me, she repeated, her voice trembling with sorrow now. I realized then, she wasn't just haunting us. She was trapped, a spirit bound to that maze, and now, somehow, we were caught in her curse. I turned to Sarah, my voice shaking. We need to go back. To the maze. What? Are you insane? We barely got out of there alive, she shouted, panic rising in her voice. But I knew it was the only way. She's not going to let us go. Not until we help her. I didn't know how I was supposed to help a spirit, but I knew that running wouldn't work. This thing had followed us home. It was bound to us now. And the only way to escape it, was to face it. We had no choice. I grabbed my keys, and Sarah, though terrified, followed me out the door. The drive back to the corn maze was a blur, the roads winding through the darkness like a nightmare that wouldn't end. My hands were trembling, but I knew we had to do this. That spirit, it wasn't just haunting us. It was trapped, and we had become part of its prison. When we arrived, the maze was completely deserted. No more laughter, no more people. Just the wind and the tall, swaying stalks of corn under a pale moon. The air felt wrong, heavy and oppressive, like we were walking into a different world. We have to find where she first appeared, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear but resolute. Together, we re-entered the maze, retracing our steps, the same path that had led us into this nightmare. The further we went, the colder the air became, and the whispers started again. This time, they were louder, more desperate. Help me. As we rounded the final corner, the woman in white appeared again. But this time, she wasn't menacing. Her hollow eyes glistened with tears, her hands outstretched toward us, pleading. What do you want? I called out, trying to steady my shaking voice. How can we help you? Her lips parted, and though her voice was faint, I could hear the words clearly. Find me, in the maze. Sarah gripped my arm, and we both realized what she meant. Somewhere in this maze, her body, her remains, were hidden. She couldn't move on until they were found. We moved quickly now, darting through the maze, searching for any sign of disturbed earth, anything that might give us a clue. The whispers grew louder, guiding us, until we reached a small clearing deep within the corn. There, half buried in the dirt, was a skeleton, its bones brittle and tangled in the roots of the corn. It was her. "We found you," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll make sure you're laid to rest." As we stared down at the remains, the cold air suddenly lifted, and the oppressive weight that had been suffocating us dissolved. The spirit of the woman appeared again, standing over her bones, her face softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her form slowly fading into the night. And just like that, she was gone. We left the maze in silence, our bodies exhausted but free of the terror that had clung to us. The maze had taken her, but we had given her peace. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The corn swayed gently in the wind, but this time, there were no shadows following us.